Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. This is a very special episode today because it's actually my final one for the Comfort Film series. Michael, my guest, was on for what were you on for, Michael? Hidden Gems.
Hidden Gems, yeah.
Hidden Gems, where we did Sienna and Duke of Burgundy.
Yes. Yeah.
And so he is back. And I like that I'm ending the Comfort series on this because the way that you have structured this is very interesting. Because normally people's comfort films are completely unrelated to one another.
Mm.
But the way that Michael has chosen these, I actually didn't even know until midway through the first film that it had to do with the other film, which also had to do with the other film. So, Michael, explain to us why you picked what you picked, but then also how they connect.
So there's 3 films in total, and we're dealing with kind of a writer and a filmmaker together. So the filmmaker is Errol Morris, who I think will probably be familiar to a lot of people. He's terrific documentary maker, has done loads of films. And the writer is John le Carré, who is a spy novelist, and his work is just like, I just love his stuff, and it's close to my heart. And I found that there were themes that were linking throughout all of the films. There's stuff about what it means to be human. There's stuff about finding meaning, and I really think the two of them are, in a way, almost kindred spirits in terms of the things that they go after in their work.
Yeah, and I think that we actually, now that I'm remembering, we got this idea when I read your Pigeon Tunnel review, and then I thought, oh, like this is very interesting. And then it kind of spurned on from there where it was like, oh, if we did Pigeon Tunnel, what would your other ones be? And then you were like, oh, Constant Gardener, which was a book by Le Carré. And then it was like, how do we connect the director of Pigeon Tunnel? Okay. And then Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control came about. So it was kind of an organic process.
Which was your pick, and I hadn't heard of that before. And thank you, by the way.
Yeah, and you had seen what? You'd seen Tabloid and
Thin Blue Line.
Thin Blue Line.
So the headline pictures, and I'm sure I must have watched Morris' film without even realizing it, because he's just made so many, but I'm not as well versed in his work as yourself.
Well, I got into him because Ebert had Gates of Heaven in his like all-time top 10, and I was like, what the heck is this movie? Where he interviews people whose pets have died, and Gates of Heaven is the cemetery. And so the whole movie is where he's interviewing these people talking about their dogs and cats and everything, and it's quite moving because it, like you said, it ends up being about humanity.
Yeah, he manages to weave that into whatever he's doing, and like the film that you picked, obviously spoilers. Is it Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control? I keep having like kittens that I'm going to say it wrong because like, oh god, it's a film title with more than 2 words in it. Well, I remember.
Yeah, it's a tough challenge. Yeah. Yeah, Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control is the one that we've decided to begin with, which is a movie where Errol Morris, he's not really interviewing, is he? It's more just like the way that it's spliced together. You don't actually hear Morris.
No, I can't remember hearing him throw a question, or if he does, I don't think it's on the actual documentary.
Yeah, I think it was to the Lion Tamer towards the end. There was like one question that he asked, but otherwise it's just edited like, somebody's talking to the camera. But he is basically, it's a short film, but he is, and it's from 1997, where he is talking with, what, Michael? A lion tamer,
a mole rat specialist,
yes,
a robot specialist,
a robot scientist, and
a topiary, like a hedge trimmer who trims it into shapes of animals. So yeah, those are some disparate fields and professions that he's gone for there. But it's like magic the way he links a through line between all of them, because all of these people, they're all trying in their own way to get some kind of purpose and meaning at life. Yes. And like, I read Ebert's review on this film, and he was talking about all of the people trying to get some kind of control in their own field. And you can see that, like, obviously the lion tamer is the most extreme example of that, because it's all about control when he's inside that barred cage. And,
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what you felt like watching that footage, but for me, I was like, oh my God. Like, you see, the first time he has a whip and a chair and a gun, I think I remember the gun coming into frame from out of frame or something. And then I was seeing it and go, what the hell, But he is all about establishing control in his domain. The robot guy, in his own way, is doing that, because people are saying, well, it must be fully pre-programmed, right? They think there's no way you can make this robot move without telling it to do. He's like, no, I just give it a set of instructions and off it goes. It does its thing based on the environment that it's in. Obviously the guy who's trimming the hedges, he's up against nature. He's trying to tame nature, and he's constantly against the elements, and he has to have a high degree of patience with what he does. And I don't know if you found this, but when I was watching it, I thought these aren't really jobs. These feel like vocations. These,
yes,
like callings.
Callings, like passions. That especially. I don't know who your favorite character was, or well, not really character person was, but mine was definitely the mole rat specialist. And he was so passionate about this, and it's just quite soothing in a way to listen to. It's fun anyway to listen to people talk about things that they're passionate about, but for them to be kind of eccentric at the same time. But I don't. Did you get the impression that they felt that they were eccentric? I think that they think that they're very normal individuals.
No, I mean, I just think he this is his passion. This is what he loves. And I think he would consider people who aren't passionate about mole rats to be odd. I think he thinks everyone should share the same passion, and it is infectious, his passion that he has. He's describing about how he sets the tunnels up when he's got the display in the museum, and the trial and error that he has to go through to get people to watch it. And he's talking about how they identify other mole rats, and he's getting into graphic detail about some of it. But he's just plowing through, and it's amazing. It's like in his cute little bow tie and his shirt, which won my heart from the first second I saw him.
I know, me too.
And I was like, yeah, no, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I'm not a massive fan of mole rats, but I would happily tour a mole rat museum with him.
Yeah. It makes you so interested in everything that they're talking about that you normally wouldn't just on paper. But then also the way that Morris cuts it together, you can see that he's trying to draw parallels between all the subjects, right?
Yeah.
So it's like when the gardener is talking about trimming, you're also seeing like robots on Mars, and then you're also seeing the circus performers. And so he's interweaving all these, like you said, disparate subjects into some sort of messaging that is underlying it, as well as when you're listening to them talk. So there's two things going on, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, like a lot of the time, the footage is different. It's blended in a way that you're hearing one thing and seeing another thing. And the link between all of them, I think, is time and like mortality. Those are the two big things that I got, because these people have, we've all got a limited window, and these people are really applying themselves and doing stuff that they want to do.
Right.
And like Morris makes the point, like through the hedge trimming, that things are ephemeral, obviously because the gardener will be gone, and so will his creations in time, but there's still purpose and meaning in what he's doing right now, even though it's ephemeral. And I think that's one of the great joys of this documentary, is that it does celebrate human pursuits, and even really eccentric pursuits, as being meaningful and being worth doing.
Yeah, and that they don't seem to have like, even when the lion tamer is talking about being afraid or having anxiety, you get the sense that there's like a courageousness about all these people, almost like a fortitude, where the level of their conviction is so strong that these other things that would normally bother people are not really taken into account, or they're just kind of minor details in the grand scheme.
It's like there's an override switch or something that they've just flicked. Their passion is like an override switch, and like, bang, we're going to go for it. Like the lion tamer had his childhood hero. that he wanted to be like. And obviously Morris is able to cut footage of that guy in films, and
Right.
he had a role type, and he brought a priest in. His mum brought a priest in to talk to him to say, can you talk him out of being a lion tamer? And the priest said, well, I encouraged him. I said, the world needs lion tamers. And it's just the most charming documentary, full of human oddity, but the link between the three of them is clear. And I think if you got those guys in a room to have a conversation as well, that would be something I would like to see a round table between them. Can you imagine?
I know. I thought that at the end of it yesterday. I was like, wow, it would have been so fun to get them all in the same room. Although I don't know that they would have had a conversation so much as like talked at each other, because it seems like they all have this like narrow window of interest. And so I wonder if they would be as engaging on different subjects.
That's a good point, I think. Yeah, it would. Sometimes I think with a documentary subject, you just got to get them on what they like and let them talk. And Morris is great at doing that. And like the circus footage that he puts in there, like it's kind of like talking about how what they do is a trick sometimes, or sometimes it's talking about it being a display or performance. And he could be talking about the animals by using that footage, or he could be talking about the human beings that are talking about the animals using that footage. It's great. It's like it's a magic trick on that. I forget the name of the editor, but she, I was looking up earlier, and she did a sterling job on this one. Absolutely fantastic.
I agree. It adds a whole other. It really adds kind of a cinematic quality.
Yeah.
But Errol Morris does this. I mean, he does it in Pigeon Tunnel as well. And then, of course, Thin Blue Line is like heavily. There's the film of the interviews, but then there's also all
dramatic
this other
reconstructions and
reconstruction. Right. One thing I was going to say before we go to the next film is I was thinking about Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, and like my takeaway, what did I learn the most? And I love the part where the lion tamer is talking about the chair. So what he's saying is
interest, right?
Yes, that he has a chair to distract the lion, the wild animal, because what the animal wants to do is kill the prey, right? And so he will take the chair and like use it, and then the animal is looking at these four legs of the chair and gets so distracted and so confused as to what he's looking at that he forgets that his main goal is to kill the human. And he was like, well, what you have to do is you can't let the animal know its own strength, that it could actually completely take you down.
Yeah.
And that to me was such an insight on us, like how I think we have these limitations, but actually a lot of times we could beat the thing we're afraid of, but the thing we're afraid of convinces us that we don't have the power to do so. So I thought that was such a great metaphor.
Yeah, it's a kind of a distraction that he uses, and he fully admits that he would be a goner if he tried to take the line on his one, and
right.
I think that is a really good metaphor for some things in life as well, because obviously some things you can't approach head on. You have to come at them sideways, and you have to use, distractions and other techniques to try and mount that challenge. But yeah, that is
and that we don't know like our own strength a lot of times. That we like think that we're in a cage, and actually if we knew, then we could destroy the enemy and get out. But like the lions have no idea. And there was another line he said where he was like, they don't even like, their cage is their world, and they see outside of the cage is the cage.
Yeah.
When really that's not what reality is. You know what I mean? So it gets
It's so insightful, and it's like one of those things where you kind of, there's a line in every conversation that he has with one of these different people that stands out to you, and you take it away and you mull it over. So yeah, no, this was a beautiful documentary, honestly, and the soundtrack is great too. The soundtrack is like it's quirky, it's an oddity soundtrack, but it's not like a grating soundtrack. It's kind of whimsical and like a almost fairy tale like.
Yeah, it is, and it's very. It's delightful. It just gives you the atmosphere of like that you're just having a good time and kind of hanging out, but then learning all these things about subjects that you didn't know, necessarily the people were invested in, much
Yeah,
less would give like their life to.
I know more about mole rats now than I ever did. So
So do I. Yeah, and I can think of them fondly, even though they're pretty disgusting looking.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to pet one, but I would
No.
love to see them in their natural environment.
And when they're like very little, like they were like in the palm of the
Mm.
guy's hand, like it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ridiculously
And then
small.
he's talking about, it could gnaw through my hand. So I was like, okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
fine.
Yeah,
Love the
no big
passion
deal.
though.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so I'm glad you enjoyed that one. Okay, so then moving on. So we have Morris there. So everybody keep in mind the director for the third installment. The second one is The Constant Gardener, which was a 2005 film by Fernando Morales, based on John le Carre's novel, which was from 2001. Michael, tell us a little bit about The Constant Gardener in terms of its plot. I know it's quite convoluted, but try to sum it up for us.
Constant Gardener is a love story in retrospect. It's also
True.
It's also about big pharma and governments and corporations and the dirty little dance they all do between themselves. It's about the Western world and our treatment of Africa, and it's also about a man's quest to rediscover his humanity, or his link to humanity, and it's all those things, and it's great.
Yeah. Did you read the novel also?
I did, yeah. I've read it a couple of times over the years, and it's one of those novels that always like kind of warms my soul when I go through it. There's something that stands out every time that I read it, like the character of Justin, and obviously the trials and tribulations that he has to go through is great, and it's about the barriers that we put up between ourselves and other people, sometimes in friendships, sometimes in relationships. And it's about having to peek over those barriers sometimes to actually find out who we are as people. And unfortunately for Justin, he has to do that in retrospect with Tessa, who's his
Right.
his much younger but very spirited, very activist orientated wife, who he takes to Africa with him. We should mention he's like a foreign office functionary, isn't he?
Diplomat, sort of.
Diplomat type person in
Yeah.
and he is very good at what he does, but obviously he's limited by the restrictions that are placed around him, and it's like he only finds out in retrospect what it means to be an active contributor to humanity, which is the line that I took away from the book. So yeah, he gets thick into the weeds. He discovers the skullduggery that's going on between the British government and between the big pharma. And Fernando Morales, he really gets you in there. Like if there's a chance to use a shaky cam, he's going to do it. But he manages to do it somehow in a way that works, and where it doesn't make you feel nauseous. Like you're riding along in a Jeep, you're right down there, you're in the ochre, you're in the dirt, you are in these towns, it's vibrant. And then when Justin goes on the run a little bit later in the movie, you feel like you're in his paranoid mindset where every security camera could be watching him. And it nails the stuffiness of like the British Foreign Office, and the sense of social norms and politeness is kind of like a smoke screen, as kind of like, we're not going to talk about that because it's indecent to talk about that. Whereas actually you should be talking about that.
Right. Well, and I think that I read something about, I think it was, I can't remember who reviewed it that I read, but that basically the fact that Fernando Morales was the director was better than it being a Westerner or a British director, that it was sort of like a neutral third party, and it was that we were able to see Africa in a better light in terms of like, it doesn't feel biased at all, or sort of like leaning one way or the other, even though it is very clearly right versus wrong. It doesn't feel quite manipulative
I think
in
Le
that
Carre
way.
said the same thing himself. He always loves it when there's like a director outside, his perspective, who comes in and who brings their own lens
Right.
to it. Because like the cool thing about this is the weirdness is the Foreign Office. The weirdness is the stuffiness of the Foreign Office. Their
Right.
refusal to look the truth in the face. Their absolute um, adherence to social norms as like a morality dodge. It's like a morality dodge. No, we're not going to talk about that. And Morales absolutely nails that. And the character of Sandy as well, who is
Yeah, Danny Houston.
oh my god, he did such a good job. And so
I
because
know.
you've got so much in the book about how the house he lives in is this awful kind of like Georgian throwback, and how his wife's horrid, and but he
Oh.
has to kind of get that type of person over in a few scenes. He absolutely manages it. His leeriness towards Tessa, his absolute moral corruption and refusal to take moral responsibility. Just when he's subtly wrapping a cricket bat handle in his office, and he's got all of the secret letters and documents just within easy access on his desk. I've got apologies. I am going to use a swear word now. I've just got in
Go
my
ahead.
notes, Sandy the shithead. Good job, Danny Houston. Is all I've got written down on that one.
Yeah. He does sort of come across as almost blasé about his own involvement. Like, it's not until the very end that he has, when he feels like he's about to be caught, that he has any sense of like guilt or
Yeah.
like remorse in any sort of way.
And contrast
Whereas
that
Ray finds
with Justin as well. He like
exactly
when he gets the news about Tessa, his
mm-hmm.
first thought is like, oh God, Sandy, it must have been really hard for you to have to deliver that news. Like his first thought is other people in that situation, So we get a great. I mean, the other thing I love about this scene is what Morales does quite well is when he cuts from one scene to another, it's a jarring transition. Like there'll be a noise of a truck beaming past or something. So he cuts scenes with like a kind of like a jar to it, and it puts you in the mindset of the characters. You feel like you're with Justin on the run, or you're with Tessa going through the village, enjoying the hustle and the bustle. And I read Rachel Weisz said about this part that Tessa was kind of like, she's a pain in the ass, but she's a pain in the ass that wants to help, is how she described the character. And I think that kind of sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. And she plays her she got an Oscar for this role, and she is mainly in flashbacks, but she's perfectly cast. And I think that also it does feel literary. You know how some movies that are book adaptations, film adaptations of books are very, they have that quality to them where you're like, this has to be based on a novel.
Like generally it's through, if you hear like voiceover, or if you hear like a description of a place. But in this, it also feels literary through like the camera techniques and stuff, which is a weird way to say it, but like the fact that he is putting you in such a visceral place, with the low angles, with the jarring shifts in scene, it does feel like you're in the heart of a novel when you're watching this film.
True. And like a documentary almost too.
Yeah,
they're real
we
people.
learn as Justin learns, right? So he goes to Bielefeld in Germany, with the home of a lot of big pharma. He does his own investigations, and he learns about Tessa, and he learns about her activist spirit, and he learns her outrage. He gets her outrage. He understands why she chose to do the things that she did, and he is totally, by the end of the movie, on board with that.
It's like he's like grown his conscience almost, or like rediscovered his conscience.
I think Le Carre said something about it's like rediscovering humanity on the fly, is how he discovered what happens to Justin. And I think that's a really good description of what happens to the character.
Now, when you read it, like what is it to you? Because I was thinking about this when I was watching Pigeon Tunnel, because I haven't read any of his novels.
Yeah.
What is it about his writing that is so? Because people like my buddy Shaw on Letterboxd loves Le Carre, and I've read, because I did the Russia House with Draper, and that was one that I think he had read himself too. So people who like his writing are like avid fans. And I just wonder if you could describe what is that rooted in? Is it in the style? Is it in the story? What is
Okay,
it that
first
speaks?
recommendation: start with The Spy Who Came In from the Cold. If you're going to start with Le
Mm-hmm.
Carre, because we might come on to that a bit later when we talk about Pigeon, but
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of like the foundation text for him. But what is so great about Le Carre is that his prose is elegant, and it's there's not a wasted word, and you get the sense of emotions bubbling underneath. So there's a lot of restraint and repression. Obviously British,
Mm.
but at the same time,
Yeah.
you do have the emotions bubbling up from underneath. Like
Right.
he can write a scene about four dull men in dull grey suits in a dull room talking, and it can be the most exciting thing you've ever heard in your life.
Wow.
Just through the dialogue and just through the social nuances that he writes. And he's like all the best novelists, I think he's got a moral core at the center of him. Like he got knocked off with being a spy. He couldn't hack it anymore because of all of the moral compromise that came with it. And that anger just burns through all of his work. But it's a useful anger. It's like a purposeful anger. And you can
Mm.
feel that as you read it.
Do you think that this might be hard to analyze since you are, but do you think that being British has any effect on your depth of understanding or the way that you can appreciate it? Do you think that is a factor?
There'll be some cultural things, like about the background of the characters, the schools they went to, like some of the snobbishness
Mm-hmm.
between the different, spies, the class factor, maybe. Like we might come on to talk a bit about Kim Philby in the Pigeon Tunnel as well. But Philby is a good case to look at someone who could only have gotten away with what he got away with because of the class system in Britain and because of how things work. So yeah, there are one or two things, but nothing a quick Google can't solve, really.
Right. So it's not like it's less accessible, because sometimes I do think that way about certain films
Mm.
where like they're so different that I wonder if like my reaction to a Japanese film
Yeah.
or, even like Italian exploitation, I always think like it's just so different than any point of reference that I have, that I wonder if it's culturally more enriching to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes if you're not reading it as intended, that can actually be a more interesting experience because you're coming at it from a different angle that maybe
True.
wasn't intended by the author, and maybe there's something else that you're getting out of it and creating new meaning, which is even more exciting to me than just being like, okay, I accept this as read, I get the cultural references, and I take away
Right.
what's intended.
Well, and you picked this also for a comfort film, Michael. Do you feel like Constant Gardener is like what about it would you say is comforting, because it's pretty
Yeah.
stressful?
Yeah, yeah, I'm a downer. No,
Okay.
we
Yeah. A lot of people are like this. I realized over doing this is that there was just so many comfort films that were
yeah, not traditionally. No, I mean
right.
this isn't the kind of film you sit down with a bag of popcorn and are like, right, I can't wait to watch these events unfold. This is more the kind of film where it's the quality of the performances and the, like we talked about, obviously the moral message and the humanity shining through. Those are the things that strike me when I watch it every time. And because obviously it takes me back into the world of Le Carre and his writing, that for me is a link to that. So that's always going to be a good time for me.
Are there any other of the, like, I know the Spy Who Came from the Cold is a film with Burton, and that there have been several film adaptations. Is Constant Gardener the one that you think is the best, as in terms of its connection to the book, like how well it was able to
I think
mirror
I
it?
would call it the best adaptation in the sense of the best, making the most of cinema, making the best use of cinema to adapt
Okay.
his work. It's not the
Okay.
one that I enjoy the most. The one I enjoy the most is Tinker Tailor, but again, that's
Yeah.
for personal like reasons and connections to the book and stuff. So,
Okay. Is that also your favorite book of his, The Soldier
yeah,
Spy?
Yeah, I'd say Tinker Tailor and Spy, Who Came In From the Cold, are my two favourites of Le Carre. And then
Okay.
I'd say Tinker Tailor is not a great place to start if you're quite fresh to him. But after you've read Spy Who Came In From the Cold, I'd give Tinker a whirl, definitely.
What is it about it that you like so much?
I like the sense of, because this is based around Philby again, so he used Philby as the jumping off point for this. So I like the sense of anger at the institution for being stupid enough to allow it to happen. I enjoy the descriptions of the spies and their work and it being quite dull and quite like drudgery. I enjoy the interplay between the characters, the fact that there is a puzzle to be solved, but the puzzle isn't really the point. The point is more how these characters relate to each other and how we relate to each other in the world. And I love George Smiley. George Smiley is the perfect father figure, if you want a father figure. So Smiley is kind of watching his mind work. He's one of those characters where the joy is watching Smiley's mind work. So it's more of like a, an intellectual thing than an emotional thing. But the emotion is definitely there. But it's just underneath.
You're kind of reminding me. So I watched Scorsese's Casino yesterday, and I had never seen it. And for a large chunk of the movie, I mean, it's 3 hours long, but for like the first hour or so, they're literally explaining how the casino works, like how the money comes in, how it's exchanged, and this person does this, and this person does this, and like the literal, just, you would think that it's mundane, but it's actually quite thrilling the way that it's described. So what you're saying is reminding me of like how sometimes just learning about something or hearing the machinations behind it, like but someone who's in the situation might consider tedious or just,
how do you
point A to point B?
How do you do that? How do you get a stolen file out of your head office? How do you do it? How do you transport it out without being caught? How do you how do you find out who the mole is in your organization? Who can you trust? What's the process you go through doing that? What are the bureaucratic layers that get in the way?
Yes.
Who are these stuffy characters that you just want to knock out because they're making things harder for you? Those kind of questions.
And he was able to do that because he was MI5, MI6, right? I mean, he was.
I mean, he was
an insider.
He would always be very humble and say he just dipped his pond into that pool very shallowly because he was only that for a couple of years. But yes, he knew enough about the secret world, as he would put it, to recreate it in literature.
Right. Which gives it this sort of, I've always said this, but I love like competency in movies where you, because the person knows what they're doing, you actually feel cool.
Yeah. You feel like you understand more.
Exactly.
than you did when you started watching the film.
Or that you even deserve to feel like there's this almost like credibility by osmosis. Like you're receiving a feeling of like, oh, I could break into a vault, or I could do this. Like this
Easy
could be
peasy.
my job.
Yeah, George Smiley wears glasses, so do I. I could definitely hunt out a mole at a spy agency. Easy. Do it in an afternoon.
Yeah, and now I know. I've read all these books and I know what I'm doing. It really is nice. I like movies that sort of transmit that feeling where the character feels that way, but then you as an audience member, because of the way that something's portrayed or in the written word,
you get it by osmosis,
where
like
it's true. Yeah. I mean, even with like David Foster Wallace, I don't know if you've read any of him, but I'm reading Oblivion right now because Infinite Jest is just very difficult. I'm going to do it, but that's a separate thing. But
I completely jest, but yes, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, right. So I had to kind of like back up a little bit, but I love his writing, and I love that his writing makes me feel smart.
Yes,
like you get this sensation, like when you're reading that the ease to which you can understand, and you feel like, I know what you're saying, Dave. It makes you feel.
Yeah, it makes you feel like a smart person. It makes your understanding of the human experience feel wider. Like, and he does,
Yes.
you know, you read a couple of pages and like, oh, I feel like I know this thing that happened to me last week. I can set that in the context of what Dave has said, you know, and
yes,
you know, I watched his "This Is Water" speech that he gave at the college, and again, it was like truth, capital T truth, as he would say, just banged out
capital
line
T
after
truth.
line after line. So,
Yeah,
but Infinite Jest is a is a toughie. I have
I
to
know we
admit
won't even get in.
that
We'll be there.
that took me I can't remember how long, but it took me a good old while to get through it. But there's sections in that are amazing. Can I tell you a non-David Foster Wallace related thing? It's just a Tinker Tailor thing, but this was really heartening for me because I was at the cinema and I went to see Tinker Tailor, and there was a row of like teenagers, like 5 rows in front of me, and you know, I don't think they were Le Carre fans, but they'd just gone to see it because of the Oscar buzz and stuff. Is my assumption.
Gary Oldman.
And like about sort of 5-10 minutes in, you know, it's a very slow burn film. Obviously, there's a lot of quiet. The character Smiley doesn't say anything for like 15 minutes or something ridiculous like that. And one of them just turned to the other one and went, "This is shit, isn't it?" But like, we got to the point where he's in Bill Hayden's house, and you see the shot of Bill Hayden's feet without the shoes on, which is obviously the implication is he's just been having sex with George Smiley's wife. And one of the teenagers just was totally invested and went, "Bastard," like that. Like, so he had been sucked in by the filmmaking, and I was like, "Oh, brilliant, brilliant."
Yeah, it's one of those moments where you're like, "Okay, I finally get it." Like, you could be sitting there for some time. That happens sometimes with me too, and then it clicks, and you're like, "Oh,
yes." It's like, this is what this is about, or even like, now I'm invested in the character. Now I want the character's journey to go well, you know.
Right. No, I think that's great. And I need to reevaluate Tinker Tailor too, because I remember just being bored out of my mind at the time, but I did not have proper context at all.
Yeah, you should get together with my mate, because I don't think he enjoyed it very much. I brought him along. I was like, "I'm sorry, I should have given you the novel first. I'm sorry."
Is it? Is Gary Oldman in that movie, or is it Benedict Cumberbatch?
It's Gary Oldman, and it's
okay, good.
He is just a chameleon, isn't he? Like, the way he's able to do.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
yeah. I just saw him in what? I just saw him in something very recently, and I was like, "This guy." Oh well, Batman.
Oh yeah.
I just rewatched Begins and Dark Knight, and I was thinking, like, this is also the guy who was in Air Force One, and like, he can be quite scary as well.
He can do that role that he does in Batman is like a really difficult role to do well, because it could be such a boring role. The straight
Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, Commissioner Gordon, the straight down the line guy who's decent and kind, does the right thing. Like, there's no, you know, there's nothing much, there's no wiggle room to play with there, but he still makes that compelling.
He does. Yes.
Somehow.
I love Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah.
Actually, he and Alfred and Morgan Freeman's characters are all kind of just good guys.
Yeah.
They don't really
the supporting gems in that series.
Yeah. They don't have a lot. They don't have like a dark side.
No, you don't see Alfred just gunning people down, do you?
No.
He doesn't need that. He doesn't need that.
Michael Caine.
I won't cry for you, Master Wayne. Amazing.
Okay, so with that, we're gonna get to the last one, which is the Pigeon Tunnel, which Michael had reviewed. Great review about Le Carre. He wrote his memoir in 2016, and then Errol Morris made the doc. It is structured sort of similarly to Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, but does feel a little bit more intimate since it's just the one subject. And I think that Morris ends up talking quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's about both of the men, you know?
Yeah.
As opposed to just...
It's kind of like, I mean, first of all, the fact that it's Le Carre having an interview is interesting, because Le Carre's whole thing is about interviews and interrogation and what is happening when we're here, you know. And the first thing he says is something like, "I need you to know who you were," when he was talking to Morris. He's like, because he talks about Morris's work, he says, sometimes you're a spectral presence in your work, sometimes you're God, and sometimes you're present, I think is the first thing he said to Morris. And, you know, it's not combative, though. It does feel like a genuine chat between two guys who are just trying to get to the truth.
Right.
And you get the sense that all of the footage that's used there are like pictures from Le Carre's life, but the pictures that come up on screen are just like sort of snaps of the picture, like parts of it on screen. So you're never getting the
Right.
full picture, as it were, just in the same way you wouldn't if you were looking back through your life. Memory is an elusive thing. So I think the film is talking about that. I think what I liked best about it was the fact that you got a sense of just how rotten Le Carre's dad was.
Yes.
Ronnie Cornwall, good old Ron,
Yes.
confidence artist, con man, as we would say these days, who literally used his own son as part of his cons, sent him to like the bookies to pick up the winnings from a horse race, knowing full well that he was in debt to some bookies, so he nearly got his son beat up. Just conned everyone in his life, but still, you get this scene where he goes to Le Carre goes to an Austrian hotel and checks in, and this one stuck with me because it's like, well, I won't go to the main hotel because they'll probably know my dad there. I just pick a smaller one at random. He goes up to the desk clerk, he signs his name, and the clerk just looks up and goes, "Your father was a great man. You treated him disgracefully," like that. So that's
Oh, right.
That's the spell that Ronnie's dad was that Le Carre's dad was able to cast over people.
Yeah, that he was just like he was almost like a charlatan, or like a, like the way that John describes him is almost like the guy had no ability to decipher reality. Like
he had an ability to bend reality to his whims in terms of like he could make what he was doing moral and good even when it wasn't, and he could he had his way of dodging like moral questions. He's like, well, when I'm gone, I'll be judged by God, son, and how I've treated you, I shall be judged. The implication being that he's actually done really quite well for John. But anyway, some of the other stuff that I like in that is the class-based stuff, because obviously Le Carre, his dad managed to send him to a posh school, but Le Carre never felt like he fitted in there. And so there was a bit of resentment there. And the fact that he felt out of sorts everywhere he went was one of the great strengths of his life, because he said that feeling of being an outsider helped him as a writer. It helped him to study these institutions from the outside.
But then he also, in conjunction with that, I think in that outsider feeling, he also did learn to adapt. Like he had this duality about him, because he does talk a lot about betrayal, and having there was a story about, I think it was a sport or something, where he was expected to act in a certain way, and so he would study his classmates, and then act that way, and then he fit in, but he never felt that he was the person he was pretending to be. Like, so there was always that schism, and that break between who he had to be in order to succeed, because he seems like he was a pretty successful student.
Yeah. No, I mean, he basically was a very good student of German. He was
That's right. He studied German.
Very good at foreign languages. Yeah. He was the type of person who you put him on something, he'll be dedicated. But again, because he grew up in a household where they were basically teaching him how to dupe people from an early age,
correct?
He was like, well, you learn how to put on a performative aspect to yourself. You learn how to do little jokes, little turns. It's not really you, but you know how to win people around. So it's like personality as performance that he learned. And he said something, very early on in the documentary, you learn very early on that there is no center to a person. And, for Le Carre, who is, for me, one of the most moral writers and the most human writers, to say that is a very interesting thing. And he said he doesn't know if it's
you don't
universal,
get the sense,
but he thinks in the sense it's definitely true of him.
Right, but you don't get the sense that that's true of his characters. Is that what you mean? Like,
I mean, some of his characters, yes, but I get the feeling like Le Carre is constantly searching for humanity, like he's trying to teach. Almost, he had to learn himself on the fly, the same way that Justin learns humanity on the fly, because he didn't have a teacher himself. He had his dad, he had to learn morality on the fly himself, and I think that's what he's constantly doing. And I think that's what made him such a good writer, because he was always searching for that thing that he didn't get in his childhood.
And I think that's more or less what he says at the end too, Michael. Like when Errol Morris is saying, like, how do you feel about yourself now? And he was saying, like, I'm just an ordinary person. I'm nothing but like the work. Like, basically, and I think maybe the best writers would say this, because King also says something similar, where like you're getting to know yourself, right? And you're putting yourself in there, and there's a part of you that's in what you write, but then it's also this exercise of like, who am I? So not just like journaling where it feels like a release of some kind, but it's also like got this exploration characteristic to it. We're actually trying to learn about yourself through the process of writing.
Yes, and he talks about his characters and the fact that these characters don't feel alive until he hears their kind of voice, until he voices them. You know, and that's like voicing a part of your psyche on the page.
Right.
And I think that's the difference between journaling and writing characters. You have to go into that imaginative zone where you have to try and use parts of yourself that maybe you haven't been in touch with before to try and get those characters out there. And I think Le Carre was a master of that. I mean, he tells the story of the Pigeon Tunnel itself, which is like when his dad was at some high-end retreat at a casino where they would release these pigeons from the tunnel for like shooting as a shooting gallery. But then the pigeons would always return again back to the cages unprompted, you know. And he intercuts that with footage from the Spy Who Came In From the Cold movie of, you know, them going over the wall. And, you know, sometimes it does feel like human beings create our own traps, as it were, and we're not aware of it, but we keep going back and we keep going back. Like Alec Lamar in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, he's someone who knows exactly how dingy and depressing the spy business is, but he wants another crack at it. He wants to give it another go for his own personal reasons. And there he goes. He finds himself again flying out of that tunnel, going into the same place. And I just think, you know, Le Carre does such a great job of explaining those drives and motivations in his character, and Morris just does such a great job of linking it back to Le Carre as a person in that doc.
As a person. And that you are like the way the Pigeon Tunnel, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I wanted you to explain it, and you did. But the morbidity or like the tragedy of the thing is that all the pigeons like go out, they're going out to be shot. The ones that don't die go all the way around and then go through the tunnel again. But it's like they are completely unaware and unaffected by the other pigeons dying around them.
Yeah. And the idea of freedom doesn't occur to them. They go right back.
Just like the lion.
Yeah. It's the only arena they know.
Exactly. But then you don't even know this idea of like not knowing that you're in a cage is just a very compelling one, I think, that goes across all these movies, because even in The Constant Gardener, you could look at it as like the British government and the surrounding that Justin's in is a cage. And not until he realizes its place in his wife's literal death does he start to see reality as it is.
Yeah.
And he didn't even know. He was just functioning in it like it was normal.
Well, and he wasn't able to use his nurturing instincts in the right way either, because like when he was in that cage, all he could do was, okay, I'm going to go out into the garden, I'm going to tend my plants. But then he used the same nurturing instinct out in the world. And that's when he really did start to have a positive impact on affairs and things. So yeah, I think you're bang right on that with terms of people not realizing the cages that they're in, and you know, the restriction of that,
the limitations, and that it's really just in your mind.
Yeah.
Like if you could change your mind, then you could literally, like, the circumstance is not the thing that needs to be changed. It's your outlook on it.
Yeah.
Which is so much more empowering than, you know, waiting around for something to shift so that you can act differently.
Exactly. It has to
You
come
can act
from
differently
it
now.
has to come from within, and that's the sense
Yeah.
that you get in The Constant Gardener. But taking it, like, the other thing I liked about the Pigeon Tunnel was Philby. So obviously Kim Philby is like a name that, like, registers in infamy throughout British spy history. He's a Soviet double agent. He's a guy who, you know, there's countless deaths that are on his hand from people that he'd betrayed to the Russians. And he's one of these guys who, when you interviewed him about, do you have any regrets? And I think he said something like, yeah, I miss being able to watch the cricket at Lord's, is the thing that he said when they asked him, have you got any regrets? So Le Carre was once asked, do you want to go and meet up with Philby? And he had to refuse because he's like, I can't, I'm having dinner with the British ambassador. I can't have dinner with the Queen's ambassador and the Queen's betrayer the next night. So there is that, even though it's a bit of a stuffy way of putting it, there is that moral core that Le Carre has, even though Le Carre would be, he would tell you, oh, there's, he has his doubts about his own morality. I think the proof is in the pudding with Le Carre. It's definitely there. Whereas with someone like Philby, it's about absence.
And that sort of self-assessment, or his ability to see himself, is more or less reflected in the work. Like, you don't get the sense that, like, Harry knows himself so much as you would tie what he's produced back to him, almost like in spite of his lack of knowing it himself, because he did make that distinction in his description of the separation, like that he's the person, but then the person who's the writer. And he was just like, I love the process of writing, which, there's some people who say, like, oh, there's a great quote, I can't remember who wrote it, about, I don't love writing, but I love having written. Le Carre is a person who loves writing. Yeah. And I think that perhaps is what elevates him in a way, or
I think he needs the work. He needs the work to feel whole. I think is what he's trying to put across to Morris, in that when he's not writing, he is nothing, but when he's writing, he feels like a complete human being. Like, all of those things, those absences that we talked about, they're rectified when he's writing, because he's on a moral quest when he's writing a book, and that moral quest reunites him with his humanity. And you see that over and over again playing out with characters in his books as well. They're on their own moral quest in extremely murky and immoral waters, but they are on their own moral quests, and they will do what they have to do in order to get where they're going. And I think that's how Le Carre viewed his writing as well.
And it also kind of ties back into the guys in Fast, Cheap, Out of Control, where it really is this idea of, what do you do in your life that makes you like yourself more?
Yeah. What gives you purpose? What gives you meaning? What if you're gonna wake up and say, I did X today, I wrote 4 passages. Is that going to be the thing, or is it going to be the thing where you're like, I discovered how mole rats distinguish each other from different clans? Like, is that going to be the thing? Because it could be. It's just, because humans, we vary, it's person to person, but having that thing is the important thing.
And I think there's certain levels to this too that interest me, like where people could be passionate about something but still find it to be a chore in some ways. Like, sometimes when people describe, like, exercise or eating well, or that it's hard, but they ultimately value it. Whereas I think what these films illustrate, especially in Tessa's character, maybe her more than anybody else, is the thing that you really love most is actually not hard to do. Like, you're fueled by it. Like, you wouldn't talk about it in the same way that you would something that you should be doing, and therefore you are doing, but it's, you know what I'm saying? I think that's like that's a distinction that is important, because it's so different when you do something out of pure love, and the love of it actually energizes you, doesn't drain you, and doesn't inconvenience you. It actually gives you energy.
Yeah, it's a strength. It's something that that adds to what you're doing. And with Tessa, I think you can see her like spirit of wanting to right these wrongs, of wanting to expose them to the world. You know,
Right.
it means that things that, like we talked about social conventions earlier, she's got no problem with breaking social conventions. If she needs to go up to someone and tell them exactly what she thinks of them at a formal function, she'll do that, you know,
Yeah.
which I found great.
Without embarrassment.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
embarrassment, because this is the calling. This is the thing that you've got to do. So that drive is there, and that can be love, but it can also be outrage. It can also be anger. Those things work as well, and I think those things are things that fuel Tessa, as well as her love for like the people that she meets in Africa. And yeah, I mean, I think you just do have to have that calling in order to do good work sometimes.
Right. Because it's sort of it's like a self-enlarging experience, but it's also others centric.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah, like when Le Carre was posted in Berlin, and obviously the wall went up at the time, and it was such a symbol of like ideological hardliners, and it was such an ugly thing, and it was almost like this was the symbol that he needed in order to for all of those things that were going on in him to crystallize it in that one thing, and he could then go and he could put that anger to use, and he could write, because you can feel it burning through every page of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. It's like a cold fury. It's not like
mm,
angry, the kind of anger shouting from like a rooftop. It's more the kind of simmering anger of someone who's writing a diary of events and as how he really sees them, but doing
yeah.
it in an imaginative way through characters.
It's almost like you're reminding me of like Bukowski.
Mm,
Like Charles Bukowski's poetry, or like Howl,
yeah,
Ginsberg, where it's like there is this intensity that has to come out, but instead of it just being chaotic rage, it's actually harnessed into like this creative ingenuity that makes it so that you can feel it, but it's not unruly
yeah,
or
or
like
overbearing. It feels
or overbearing.
it feels like the writer wants to help you along on the same journey that they've gone through, rather than just
Yes.
talking at you. They want to be like, this is how I got to this point. Here's a story that will illustrate that. Like when you read Spy Who Came In From the Cold, by the time you got to the last page, you know why Le Carre, he would have exploded if he'd carried on being a spy. Just he would have exploded with anger and outrage. So you feel that in his work. And like the interview that he's having with Morris, although a lot of it is just like Le Carre, here's Le Carre sitting in a study and all of the angles are skewed and off kilter,
Yeah.
as you would expect with this kind of
Yeah.
thing. The gold
Yeah.
there is Le Carre himself. He is a great interview subject. He knows how to be a good interviewer. He knows how to be a good interviewee. He also like counsels Morris. Like at one point, Morris is like, "What am I doing?" And am I just trying to get stuff out of you? And Morris is like, look, every interviewer sometimes tries to see a bit of themselves in the person they're interviewing and stuff like that. So you get the sense that
Yep.
Morris isn't going to get anything out of Le Carre that Le Carre doesn't want him to get. But I feel like they both have like a mutual respect and understanding, so that there is truth being got out there.
Yeah. And like you're illustrating again, where I wonder how much of our creative pursuits have to do with just us having a strong desire to know ourselves.
Yeah.
Even in interactions, and even in like, Letterboxd is a perfect example of this. I feel like there are people who write where you can tell they want to be liked or that they want validation. And then there are people who write where I feel like they want to know what they think.
Yeah.
And it is just, it doesn't matter if anybody reads it or not. Like this just happens to be the place that they're putting it, but it really is a genuine desire to arrive at some truth or arrive at a level of self-examination that is helpful,
Yeah.
or that expands the film or the material?
Well, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but like in my 20s, I would go and like DVDs were the big thing. I would go and get a new DVD. I'd watch a movie and be like, "Oh, that was cool," and it was cool because of X, Y, and Z on a technical level, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
I would relate to some of the characters, but it wouldn't go any further than that. That would be it. I would put that out of my mind. And then when I got a little bit older, and I was like, actually, do you know what? That there's that old Greek that quote from like change only the names, and this story is about you. Um, and I
Oh,
thought
that's a good
about
quote.
that quote, and it would kind of made sense. And then I had like a kind of epiphany moment where I was like, right, I want to try and I still want to have entertainment and popcorn stuff. That's fun, but I want to seek out the stuff that helps me be like a better person and understand myself better and not put my foot in it quite so much. You know, that would be always helpful. So that's my kind of journey. And like when I sort of write stuff, I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to put this out here and see what happens. I don't particularly care whether anyone like really likes it or not. The things that I like are actually some of my best pieces have less likes, but I've got comments of people that people have left where they've like really related to it, and that's the stuff that's special, I think.
I agree. And I think that the truer you are, or the more reflective you are of
Mm,
yourself, and the more aligned your understanding is with who you actually are, it's going to resonate differently. Like your writing in particular, I love the one that you did on The Shining,
mm,
actually. But that's what comes to mind as one of your great pieces that I remember, where you your interaction with the film in relation to your interpretation of
mm.
it just like enriches the film itself. So it's this sort of dialogue
Yeah.
between the artist and the audience, but you specifically. And then I don't know, I just think that that whole exercise is gratifying in the way that it does for you, but then when someone reads it and it's like, oh, like you've really made this movie different for me, or now I'm going to watch it differently because of the way that you wrote about
Well,
it.
that I mean, that's the most gratifying thing to hear, really. It's like if I can switch a light on for
Yeah.
someone and they can see a new room all of a sudden in it, you know, and they can see a room that wasn't
Yeah.
there before. That's great. You know, that's what we it's magic. But yeah, no,
It
the
is.
Shining was just like a weird
Yeah.
review for me because I watched that film so many times, and I just thought, do you know what? I'm just going to take a swing for the fences and try something different, and try and like imagine if I could write from the hotel's perspective,
I
what would I be
know.
writing? You know,
Yeah.
because the hotel has
Right.
obviously been around longer than the characters, and the hotel is drawing on all kinds of history from America, and as the film does, because that time tends to get that tends to go under the radar because people talk a lot about the characters and the emotions of the characters quite rightly, but there's a lot of historical context going on in that film. You know, they don't mention the Indian
With the
burial ground for
overlook.
no reason. So,
Right.
you know,
Right. Right.
um,
It was a very cool creative POV, as well as just the depth of it. And I think that so much gravitate towards writers who are attempting to do that rather than just the style of their writing, or how many cool words or they have. There's like a musicality to it,
yeah,
almost, to great writing.
yeah, it's just one of those
Yeah.
things where you want to try and create something that flows and that creates interest and like engages someone in the film. Like the best
Hmm.
thing is if someone hasn't seen a film before and you go and read your piece and they go off and watch it, that's gratifying as well, because that's happened the other way
Yes.
to me where I've read like pieces that you've written, other people have written, and I've gone, right, okay, I'm definitely checking it out.
I'm watching. I'm definitely
Yeah,
watching this. The best thing is when it's like, I'm going to do it right
yeah,
now. Like that has happened to
yeah.
me, where I will read a review and I will literally be like, I'm watching this movie
Mm.
now. And oddly enough, it can happen where the person just gave it 3 stars or something. Like it's not even that they think that it's extraordinary, but the way that they've written
Yeah.
about it is so compelling, and you're just like, you have to watch
I
it.
always think the mark of a
That's the
good
good stuff.
review is if someone doesn't like a film, but they can describe it in enough detail for you to think, hang on, I might actually like this for the same reasons you dislike it. That to me is the mark of a really good review.
True. Yeah. Well, and I would imagine that, with Le Carre, it's like, uh, when you read his stuff, you're taken into a world that completely isn't your own, but you feel like you can function in. I think that's also the genius, is if you can make someone feel in your context that they're completely unfamiliar with, that they belong, or that they have some sort of entry into it, then that's really powerful too.
Yeah. Like, just even like you talked about Casino, even just having an understanding of the world, like, because I mean, I'd be a goner in
Mhm.
like a John le Carré spy novel. I'd be like, oh yeah, I had a great mission today. I'd be giving secrets away right, left, and center. But I can understand that world through his writing, and I can understand the competence of the characters and the various things that make up their relationships to each other and to spying. And with spying as being a metaphor for the human condition, which he does quite a lot, which
Right.
is to quite a powerful extent.
Great stuff. Okay, so Michael and I want you guys to watch The Constant Gardener, Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, The Pigeon Tunnel. I hope that this has been an edifying experience. It certainly was for me. And I'm glad that I'm more familiar now too, not just with him as a writer, but with the ways in which the films were able to sort of capture that essence. I feel like I know him in a different way now, that if I picked up one of his books, it would be very different than before.
Cool. Well, again, that's gratifying to
Yeah.
hear. And yeah, go check
Yes.
them out. Go check them out.
Yes. Reading and the
Yeah.
documentary. Thank you very much, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
And, oh, of course, anytime. We'll see you at the movies.